All right, all right, all right. Welcome everyone. It's first of all, I think I'm gonna stick with Fridays 2100. Some of you might have noticed that it's usually Sunday. I changed my mind on that though. Too many timers going on. And wait a second, did it ping out? Did my bot break? Oh, it worked on. All right, 1 sec.
I'll tell you anything for the right amount of bits.
So I'm gonna stick with Fridays 2100 for the next time. Simply because timers and all that stuff on weekends, there's too much stuff going on. But what better episode to change it up a bit than this one? Obviously, a pretty special episode. Formerly known as Kill 2, FCing the smallest of fleets. I'm not sure if you ever FC'd an actual fleet, but I kind of count Solo as FC. Yeah, you know what? Solo is not a fleet, you know what I mean? I know you as a solo guy. I'm not sure if you did small gang gangs.
Subscribe to Pando?
I did do small
That's
gangs.
so
You can even see me
hot.
do it on YouTube still.
There you go. So you did actually FC.
There was proof that I actually FC'd.
I wouldn't dare to make an exception here for like a special guest, right? So,
No, I passed.
but yeah. All right. But in 2013, I believe you joined CCP as a dev. And over the last 7 years, I mean, it's a long time now, right? 7 years. I feel like you became pretty much like the community's favorite dev. I really do believe so. I think in general, yeah. I mean, there's a couple really good devs. You guys got a good team going.
That's so
But in
hot.
general, I think you're top 3 for everyone, right? Definitely.
It'd be so
You're up
funny.
there.
I would be curious who would be.
I'll
people's
tell you
favorites if they knew
anything
what anyone actually
for the
did.
right amount of bits.
It's like, there's real heroes at CCP that people don't know about, and people who take a lot of public space but waste a lot of time like me. So,
You know
but
what?
thank you.
That's similar to FCN. I see it pretty
There
much
you go.
this. Yeah, I've dudes like mapping wormholes and setting stuff up, and they've got that intel and stuff like this, and they're way smarter than me, especially when it comes to IT stuff. Shout out to Aaron Cable, he's the man, right? If I say like, hey, we need temp links for our Mumble server, the next day it's done, right? So yeah,
I mean,
that's the
this is the same. I have like half of a thing I think about working on, and then I talk to a bunch of people smarter than me that you guys don't know,
Hmm.
and then I get to go out and announce it.
I have to turn up the volume. Give me 1 sec.
Uh-oh.
Here we go. That should fix it.
Sorry about
Turn
that.
up, Rise. That was my fault. Like, I have to turn you up. Alright, should be better now. I'm sorry, guys.
Better now, guys. Sorry. I
Yeah,
made like 10 really good jokes before you could hear me.
yeah. Everything he said so far was perfect. Just say that, alright?
Yeah. Pretend I started off really strong.
Well, I'm sure they could hear you. They just had to focus for once, right? This is not the F1 pusher kind of podcast, right? You have to pay attention and do your thing, right? Listening is a job, right? But yeah, I still believe you are one of the. I believe you're probably the favorite FC and FC dev, and you know what? Yeah, I think the main reason for that is you're talking to a lot of people that also most people probably don't see that you're doing in the background with the CSM and all that stuff. FCs are very aware of that and they appreciate it.
It's cool. I've been thinking lately about, I don't know how it's tough for you guys. I more and more rely on players, I think, and I'm like building up a big kind of I don't know, resource pool of people to talk to, including people like yourself. And it's pretty amazing how much work gets put in by you guys, but then you don't get, I think a lot of time the public doesn't see how much of those conversations go into the changes we make. And also I think a lot of the time it must feel rough because of how much I've broken your heart twice in the last couple months, right? Talking to you about all the big hopes you have and the problems you deal with, and then do something that's basically backwards to what you're hoping for. Nerf boosters instead of nerfing supers first, and you're not the only one who's had that experience, but I still very much appreciate getting a lot of help from a smart group of players. It's crucial.
You know what? It's super tricky sometimes for me to stop myself. Right? I know you're getting spammed by people, and I'm like, oh shit! Like I can't just combo him right now and tell him like, hey, what about this? Right? The shower thought kind of thing. I have to stop myself so many times, and just still getting spammed by me sometimes. You know what I mean? It's like
yesterday my Discord was like, I needed like an assistant to like filter because
I can imagine.
So many people, which is great. I mean, it's fine. I'm super happy to hear from people, but yeah, can be a lot. I mean, it's good. Everybody cares a lot. Everybody's trying to like help make the game better, so no complaints from me.
That's exactly, I think, how you have to see it. Otherwise, it's gonna you're gonna go crazy. And then at this point, also, people have concerns with some things of the patch. The reason why we're gonna talk about that, and I just want to say, like, I'm gonna bring stuff up that I might not even agree with. And then you have the typical situation that on Reddit and on the forums, like, people are just like getting super crazy about stuff, right? And then they always represent their one like play style, really, and it's always super hard to get it right for the entire game, right? It's like, how do you like faxes? I didn't want to start with faxes. And I think let's talk about it a little later on, but at the same time, like, how do you balance something that should be strong for small gangs, and then still strong for medium size, but then not too strong for large fleets to like exploit it to no end. It's almost impossible, I would say, right? So like, where do you cut it off? That's the kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I mean whether or not I think you can reach a balance for all three, you can't change it without changing all three. Like that's, even if there is some perfect version of it that is pretty ideal across all three, whenever you try to make a change, especially if it's just because of one area, you're going to affect the others, and then people have to adjust, and that never feels good. I mean, if you're used to doing something, and then especially if the change is not described as being, because of a problem in the ecosystem or the play style that you have, but you have to make an adjustment anyway, that's not going to feel great. But we have to deal with that pretty much always, because we don't have wormhole specific ships and null specific ships, and so we inevitably end up making everyone adjust at the same time, even if there's one area we're trying to deal with, and it's just part of the territory, I think.
Yeah. So you also mentioned you rely on players like me or like other FCs, and also I know you talk to like small scale, medium scale people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever like, so that also comes from you not being able to play the game just as we do, right? Now you can play it. Probably your old play style. It's pretty open for you still, right? You can solo around. But when it comes to like FCing or leadership positions in alliances and making those like bigger things, you can't really play that way. So do you ever regret that you cannot really play the game like that?
I mean, like you said, the way I play the game is fairly open, so I don't have like this, I don't struggle with feeling like I'm blocked out of playing a way that I wish I could. But it does mean I have to rely on people a lot. And I think across all of dev, one thing you mentioned, the leadership and kind of motivational layer, like why are people, if we're trying to introduce some new objective or change something about the way objectives work or about the way resources work or anything like that, it's very hard to have firsthand experience at this point as a dev on how those decisions are getting made. I talked about this a lot with both Exuki and Loraseko and other people in wormholes during that wormhole pass we just did, because the changes to frig holes and to rolling holes in general, along with the connection changes, all of it affected a lot about how evictions work and how motivation around evictions works. You know plenty about this, I'm sure. And that level, the like, okay, now we're deciding to make more evictions, or now we're deciding to do less because the ability of null to interfere. It's super hard for us to have firsthand access to that kind of decision making, so we have to rely on people a lot.
Yeah, I was about to say, you probably
Go ahead.
can't. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt.
No,
But
so,
you probably can see like why certain wars or fights start when they happen. But it's probably very hard to see all the fights and wars that never happen, or steps and decisions
exactly.
that, you know, like when leadership decides to not do something. Like you never see that. There's no way of finding out. It's the same with like smaller fights, like a roaming gang. Why doesn't that roaming gang, I don't know, warp to this and this structure and start, right?
Yeah.
Like the fight never happens, so you can't see it, right? And that's
Yeah,
also an argument.
and that could be, there are some, I think sometimes when we have something top level that we can measure just in behavior to kind of confirm whether or not we've made a good change, that's fine. But with something like evictions, we don't even have a reasonable way to measure it. And even if we did, it's like rare enough and volatile enough that we couldn't really trust any conclusions we made from that data. So we end up having to talk to people. I think that's our really our only option when it comes to that more motivational decision, especially like you're saying, when it's something not happening. I think the closer you go to the sort of gameplay we do have access to actually, FCing, especially at smaller scales, or I don't know, lots of other stuff, it's possible for us to have firsthand experience, and we do have a good spread of people in the company doing a variety of things, so it's easier uh, to not have to reach out for that kind of stuff. But yeah, the leadership stuff is hard.
Yeah. I wouldn't know how to get around it. But I think, yeah, talking to players is the only way. And then I bet a few people, when they hear this, they're like, oh no, but these players, they're probably gonna manipulate you or whatever. But I really do believe 99% of players they talk to you because they're passionate about the game. They want the greater good to benefit. Like, yes, you always have to have in mind that they're talking from their own perspective with their own playstyle. But in general, I have talked to so many like FCs and like leadership people and stuff. I always have the feeling like they want the game to be healthy. They want the game to do good, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's a reliable source for anyone who's worried about that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think people can't help but try and endorse changes or advocate for the way they want to play the game, and we all disagree about exactly what the right direction is for everything. It's not like everybody has the same idea of what a healthy Eve looks like, but I totally agree with you. I think almost everyone that's going to spend the time to talk to us about what they think should happen, or trying to give feedback about how things have affected them, they're just trying to advocate for the game being as healthy as possible. And then it's just a matter of, I think, talking to enough people to get some diversity of opinion, because of course people don't always agree, but I for the most part trust people's motivations quite a bit. I think everybody, especially in our community, is really trying to make the game as good as it can be.
And I think that's coming from like how old the game is. Right? People are so invested in it that that plays a big role there. And since Olmeca is in chat, a big part of that is also the CSM, right? I know there's like mixed feelings about too many Imperium people on and all that stuff, but in general, I would count the CSM in there, obviously, right? They like whenever I talk to anyone from the CSM, I always have the same feeling. They want the game to do good and want to improve it, right?
Yeah, 100%.
They're not always right. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everything every CSM member ever said is right. Right? That would be ridiculous. But they have the right things in mind at least. But I feel like the CSM stuff in general, it changed a little bit recently. The approach of the CSM with a little bit more the presentation kind of style, right? And I think Exuki, who you mentioned before, he actually brought that brought that in, right? He did the first presentation, and then you guys noticed probably that actually is quite useful, right?
Yeah, it was really great. A lot of the time, the way we would usually set up summit sessions, especially, is to just bring something we're working on, and then they respond. And having presentations like Izuki did for the first time at Spring Summit or whatever, or Winter Summit, what puts the CSM in a more proactive position to say, hey, this is what we're worried about, or this is an overview of a play style, or whatever they want. And that went really well when Izuki did that, just kind of laying out um, kind of an overview of wormhole space, which was supplemented with this pretty amazing survey he did. And then this last summit, we had 3 or 4 presentations from other CSMs on various topics, and it was all incredibly useful. I mean, all these people are super smart, and like you say, they don't always agree with each other, and we don't always agree with them. But it's pretty cool to have them in that sort of proactive stance, saying like, "This is the thing I want you to hear," or "This is a vision I have for how some part of the game could work." Um, I think um, it's a lot different than just them responding, sitting there and saying, us saying, "Oh, we're going to nerf resist," and them saying, "Well, what about this and this and this?" It's them bringing something that they've kind of built, which is totally different. So it's been really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think there's still this misconception about the CSM that a lot of people think like the CSM are coming in, or they're supposed to come in with a certain agenda and push for this and this change or whatever. They will bring up stuff. I'm pretty sure that certain issues they will bring it up, but that's not the idea really, right? They're more designed to be a tool for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of like, I think what the CSM has thought of itself as being has changed and evolved. And then I think the way that different teams and parts of the company try to use the CSM varies quite a bit. So I don't think there's one like, this is what the CSM is supposed to be. But I think for the most part, especially the summit sessions, usually have a format of the CSM being there as a resource, some part of the company or some team bringing in some material to put in front of them, and then get help with either help on how the feature would work, or what kind of things they would see as issues or whatever, or a lot of the time like how to handle communication, like what are players going to be worried about, and what kind of things do we need to make sure we cover if we're going to go out and talk to people about this. They're often in that more reactive mode, I think, especially at the summits. But yeah, it's also pretty open, and there's quite a bit of different approaches like over the different CSMs over the years, and between different teams and groups at CCP.
Yeah, what I hear like constantly is like the most stuff gets done at dinner, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then
I mean,
like
that's
everyone's
just
having
true
a
of
beer,
work in
just
a way
chilling.
too. That's like all of my best features got made in a bar, not at the office. And I think that just applies to the CSM as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Once
yeah.
people loosen up and kind of have the freedom to say what they really think without being in a meeting with like 16 other people, it often like speeds up the process a lot. So we get a lot done during the dinners and whatever. That's why the summits are really important. They're really good for
Yeah.
both like building relationships, and also for just talking through things in a more casual way.
Well, there have been voices that said, like certain people that said, like the CSM is completely useless, and the money that CCP spends on flying all these guys out and like taking them out to dinner and stuff like this, it would be smarter to just employ another dev.
I mean, I don't know, if you like looked at all of CCP, what everybody would say, but to me, the CSM is like really critical. I mean, it's amazing to have a group of super high level, well connected people too, that can get me resources if I need them from other parts of the game. Just have them basically on call all the time and willing to talk through things. I would be a lot slower if I didn't have them. I would end up having to. I've actually already been talking about trying to find ways to get NDAs for people that I talk to regular outside the CSM, because I feel like I need even more of that kind of resource. And if they were not there, or if I didn't have the summits to build relationships with them and understand who was the right person to talk to for what, I think it would hurt Dev a lot. Um, not saying it's perfect or it couldn't be better. There's always room for improvement, but I think to me at least, it's a really, really important institution.
And then like, so if you would have like other people under NDA for like certain areas or whatever, that's usually stuff then you could have happen at FanFest too, right? So at FanFest, a lot of people approach you and pitch their thing, I can imagine, right? And people told me, like, you have to tell them this or whatever, right? If you meet at FanFest. And like, at FanFest, I'm not going to talk to anyone about anything. Like, let's just enjoy the FanFest.
It's funny, sometimes people will come up with like a clipboard or a notebook with like all the things that their
Oh
people
my
told them
God.
to say. So they go down a list, like one guy said you gotta nerf this, one guy said you gotta make the range longer on the Nurgle, one guy said you gotta add Tech 2 salvage drones, and then he gets to like his thing he wants to, which is
oh shit. But that's more like a joke then, surely, right? I mean, not always. That's probably
it depends.
a couple, but
But it's fun. I mean, it's fun talking to people. I mean, it's tragic not getting to do FanFest this year. Like, I love talking to people in person instead of only having Reddit threads as feedback.
Oh God! Don't take only Reddit as feedback, please. That's exactly the thing with the That's what's happening on Reddit or on the forums or in general.
Or Facebook. Check out EVE Online Facebook if you
Oh
want to
no,
see
I
some good
don't.
feedback.
I didn't log into
there.
Facebook for ages, and I don't plan on logging in ever again. But like on Reddit and the forums and stuff, like, so usually what happens is also people come out of their alliances. They've got to push for their kind of changes, and then usually what happens is Reddit or the forums, they find that one opinion, and then that's stuck, right? Then it's an echo chamber suddenly, and then that opinion gets blown out of proportion. That's what I feel usually happens on those platforms, and it's very like there's usually a legit point to it, right? But then it gets crazy super fast too, and it's always hard then to for me at least to evaluate like how important of an issue, how big is that issue right now anyway,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the hardest thing about looking at public, like social media based feedback, because it's really tough to tell what scale of concern or effect there is, or whatever, whether it's positive or negative. Like, how many people is this actually representative of? You It's it's so hard to tell, because you can be so disproportionately loud in some cases, or in some cases maybe it's like kind of quietly positive for a really big group who just doesn't really care to post anything about it, and it's tough to tell. But we do have we have other methods. Both are like expert sources, which is a really valuable checkpoint a lot of the time for what's being said on social media, but also we have like broad player surveys and stuff like that that can help either validate or invalidate what we're seeing on social media. So there's a couple different angles, and and I think any one of them on their own could be pretty problematic.
Yeah, and then you said quietly positive. I think that's happening all the time, right? The good stuff usually doesn't get as much press, especially on Reddit. It's seen as a sport to shit on the bad parts. As small as the bad part might be, they
it varies a bit. We've had some good runs lately. The filament stuff enjoyed a really positive run on social media, where everybody was making threads about it and posting stories and stuff. That was really cool. So it happens now and then, but yeah, I think if any change where you have like 5 really mad people and 100 quietly happy people, you're going to hear the 5 mad people much more.
If I was a hardcore Redditor, I would now say, but the filaments are way too expensive. The way they are implemented, I'm not super happy. But hey, right.
The cost is broken in every direction. I need to go and tweak some of that. There is actually some changes coming for that soon. We're going to use the 25-man filaments as a like login reward for something soon, so those will be a little more accessible than the 15s even, I think, which will bring the price down a little.
That would be nice. That would be
But we
nice.
also probably need to cut the build cost down on the 15 some, and then make the 5s a little rarer, because the 5s, when I built the 5s, I accidentally put it in. I doubled the loot table, so they drop twice as much as they're supposed to. So they're super cheap. But what are you gonna do?
Well, I hope they're going to be cheap enough for people to use them even more. I think a lot of people
Yeah.
use them already, even though they're expensive. And
Mhm.
with the 25s coming out, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Because you know what? 15, man, that's usually the corp gangs that I run. But 25, you can do like just so much more, especially with the nerfs that we're going to talk about in a minute too, with the resists and stuff like this. So there might be some stuff that's opened up. And then obviously the fax capital cap booster stuff and so on. Maybe we should
Lots
just
going
dive
on.
into that.
I was gonna tell you before we move on, the filament stuff is crazy. There's still, like, now after Christmas event, then after the release of normal filaments, still seeing almost 2,000 filament activations a day. It's
That's a
like
lot of gangs.
a lot of people jumping randomly to nullsec. It's pretty wild. Um,
That's good to hear.
Definitely most of it's 5-mans for now. There's not a lot of people doing 15s, of course, but that's just cost. But yeah,
Yeah,
anyway,
I mean,
what's next?
so you guys called this surgical strike.
Yeah, should it have been called napalm instead?
Yeah, I guess so, right? I mean, it affected literally every ship in the game,
Hmm.
and you know the name isn't
No,
too
that's not
accurate.
true. Not literally every ship.
Well, the ones that use hardness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which
All
is
right.
a lot of them, but not all of them.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. That was a little wrong, but
My
I was surprised.
double shield extender stabber doesn't care at all about this change, except
Yeah,
for
you're
hail.
right.
Maybe
You're
it
right.
cares about that.
But I was super
Yeah, hull
surprised.
tanks. That's a good point. Hull is a huge hull tank buff.
Brutex Navy issues.
Yeah,
There you go.
there you go.
But
Yeah, where do you want to?
why did you not go for hit points instead? And why did you decide the resists are actually the ones that you want to touch?
Yeah, so we've been, I mean, as you know, everyone, the community and us both have been talking about capital EHP nerfs for a while. And the assumption, sort of before digging into the work, is that it would just be base HP, um, whether through the plate bonus or through the base HP on the ship, or both. Um, but when we started kind of digging a little more, we incorporated these. We have, for a long time, actually been talking about two other big goals, and we've actually, like, it's funny because this change is sort of a soft step towards them. We've talked about much more explicit steps towards these goals, which are to make fights bloodier, basically make it so there's more trading in general, like try to promote ships dying, especially like making it so the losing side can get kills even when they're losing, um, and connected to that, putting some kind of diminishing returns over time on logistics, for sort of the same reason, so that fights don't stall out, um, where either nothing's dying on either side or one side is permatanking and able to totally wipe the other side. Um, those two things have been big topics. Like, I remember at least talking about them with CSM, at CSM summits for at least the last, two CSMs. But we haven't made any big steps towards them, and we've been talking about a lot of different ways we could do that, accomplish that. Everything from things like, I've always liked, for instance, the idea that logistics, for every rep cycle from logistics, you do a tiny bit percent structure damage, so that if you rep something for long enough, the same thing, it just falls apart and blows up.
Yeah,
um,
I always thought shield transporters, like what they should
yeah,
be
it should take your own
transporting
shield
their.
and
Yeah,
transfer.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's what I always thought. Like, why isn't that the thing, right?
Yeah. So once we started looking at HP, we realized just this is a cool opportunity to incorporate those goals, because using resist as a way to bring down capital EHP, which relies really heavily on a lot of resist modules and a lot of high end resist modules, is just going to feel that change a lot, but that's going to scale down, um, to matter less and less. So by the time you get to frigate fights and cruiser fights, it's not super important. you know, and then somewhere in the middle, it's somewhere in the middle, and capitals are going to feel it the most. And so we get this goal of making fights bloodier, letting it be more likely that you can trade back kills, making it so that logistics has less chance to stall out fights completely, um, and kind of all wrapped up with the capital EHP nerf. So that felt really good. It's definitely not perfect. I think a lot of the concerns that people are loudly bringing up now are totally legit. Although I do think a fundamental issue we have is that there are people who rely on permanently sustaining tanks. Like, to them, that's a critical part of the way they play, particularly around facts. That, like, we have 5 or 20 or whatever the number is invincible ships because we've invested so much in them and their output is so high. And under this change, it gets harder to do that. And I think it's tough because that is what we want. We want it to be less likely that you can just permanently tank a giant fleet without losing anything, because we think that's less fun than if there's losses on both sides. And so I think we're going to have to work back and forth a little bit on that to make sure that people feel like investing in their ships and investing in efficiency and force multiplying is something that feels rewarding. But at the same time, we don't feel like too many fights are stalling out, or too many fights are completely, one thing that happens, which we are talking about before, that's hard to measure, is how many fights don't happen because you simply can't expect to kill anything. Like, even if you're someone who's not that interested in efficiency, you're willing to throw away 50 caracols, but you won't get a single kill. Maybe you don't take that fight, and our hope would be that now you do, but of course that's hard to measure. And the guys on the other side might say, well, now we're not going to take the fight against the 50 caracols because we'd have to give up 2 ships, and that's too expensive to be worth it. But we at least want to start pushing on this and seeing if we can find somewhere where there's a little more trading and a little more chance of getting kills. So that's where it comes from, and then it's a matter of sorting through details, which there's a lot to sort through. A big motivation for me in doing this is getting, like you said, a change that affects everybody at the same time. I think some of my favorite periods in EVE history are like when Heat came out or when Rigs came out, and the entire system had to be rethought all at once, and people who could adapt fast found really cool spots for themselves. And I think most of our balance work over the last few years has been pretty targeted. So it's like one specific piece of the system changes, but everybody else gets to be comfortable. And I kind of like the idea that we do more changes where all the way across the whole game, everybody has to rethink.
Yeah. And I think even though I was surprised, and I think I need some more time, to be quite honest, I need some more time to think about all the fits and all implications the patch has. I like to have discussions even on Reddit or whatever, even though I was shitting on Reddit earlier. Talk to certain people and stuff, and then throw around ideas and talk about those problems. But I think it will take some time, and it will take some undocking and testing to figure out actually what works, what doesn't work anymore, and all that stuff. And I don't see that as a bad thing. Really, I don't. And I think the resist.
To me, that rethinking and having to go test seems really positive. It's only negative if once that's done and we come out the other side, the system's worse, right? Like, if you come out the other side and now only hacks are viable or only sig tanking is viable, and we lose some section of diversity that we had before, like, that's obviously pretty trash if that's how it works out. But my hope now, and something I think we've been able to really have groundwork to do, is actually iterate quickly. And so I have more trust now that we can follow up with stuff if we need to, and that makes me want to make bigger changes.
I was about to ask, what if let's just say this patch, the resist stuff turns the whole game upside down and it all turns to shit, which is very unlikely. Which I think it's not quite the opposite, but it's gonna go in the right direction. I think the points you mentioned before, that you don't want those unbreakable tanks and stuff like this on grid, and you want some trading going on. I think that's exactly what it's going to promote. But let's say it turns to shit. Like, how long would you think you guys would be observing? I mean, you need some time to observe and get some data.
Yeah, that's always tough because it takes time for us to process, and it takes time for, like, with something this big, it'll, like, how long would you think it'll take before it stabilizes? It could
Yeah.
be 6 months. I don't know, but
Yeah, I think six
I think,
months is probably a good time frame.
but this, I would think that we'll at least see some of the basic trends out of this pretty fast, and making follow-up stuff in 2 or 3 months, specifically because of what happened. I mean, we're going to be making more changes than that in the meantime. There's lots of stuff on the way, but I think looking at, you know I think being able to see, for instance, that, like, facts are totally unviable in wormholes after this, and they're just not used at all anymore, or um, any kind of uh, small scale active tanking is completely unviable and just goes away, and now there's only fast kitey stuff like that. I think that kind of stuff we could see pretty fast and would be able to make adjustments for pretty quickly. More like 1, 2, 3 months rather than 6, 7, 8 months.
Yeah, that's one of the concerns. There was actually Torvald who was streaming earlier, and he
Mhm.
was asking, or someone in chat asked me, like, the patch notes, yay or nay. And then Torvald said, like, isn't it going to promote kiting more, right? You guys wanted to aim for, like, a little bit more brawling. Brawling gets more DPS and so on.
Well,
But,
yeah. I mean, so for the reasons I said before, we wanted the resist the reason we retracted the resist change. This is stuff I said before, and that's not necessarily meant to favor brawling or kiting particularly. It's just we want more trading, like we want more damage, um, and uh, it turns out that one of the implications of that is that if you're mitigating damage with sig and speed, you're less affected. So in that way, it does, of course, favor kiting to some extent. But I don't think it's quite that simple. A lot of kiting um, is a combination of strong based tanks and fast sig based tanks. And so things like Lokis are really heavily affected, even though they care a lot about sig and speed. Um, in other cases, yeah, it's definitely going to be more. I mean, to me, I mostly think of really small scales because I don't really know of a lot of big doctrines that are happy to, like, sit and rely on strong resistance tanks to mitigate damage. I mean, is anyone doing that in a place where that's going to shift suddenly, and they're not? It's not like nobody's going to be able to field Abaddons now. Like, that's not a thing. Um,
we
and
cannot fly
so,
Avalons
okay, but
every now
so
and then.
the important point to me is that if is that the issue of, like, kiting versus brawling needs to be, to me, handled from other angles. Your suggestion about mass on turrets, making web bubbles or painter bubbles, making new module types that help you close distance or help you slow down kiters, like, to me that problem isn't solved this way, and I think we earn enough from opening up resists a little bit, lowering resists, that it's worth it, and then we can look at rewarding brawling with from other angles. And that, I mean, the reason the short range ammo change is in here is sort of for that. It's sort of saying, okay, this is sliding us a bit towards a kitey direction. Let's give some more incentive to brawlers, and I think we should just continue down that road, trying to build up reasons to reward people for committing to close range. And it doesn't mean every change we make has to push that direction.
Yeah, um, I think it definitely is the kiting brawling discussion. It's definitely one of those things that we have to, have a look at for a while. Like, the meta, it doesn't develop within a week or 2 or 3. Some things take years to even develop, right? I'm just saying, like Stukas, for example. At some point it became a thing, but MJDs, like, all the tools were there for, like, how long? I don't even know. 2 years, and nobody cared really. And then it started picking up, right? So some metas just develop very slowly, and people are used to certain things and they stick to that. So yeah,
But I mean, I also don't want to use that as, like,
I know.
a cop out to, like, a fairly logical argument. Like, there's some things where you can say, like, yes, now if you're mitigating this way, you might have more of an advantage against something that's mitigating more based on resist modules. And I think that's legit. And we just need to think about how we want to promote the short range, more tanky oriented stuff relative to kiting. I mean, it's, yeah, that topic is really big though. Like, I think over Eve's history, everyone's gotten better at realizing and implementing the fact that mitigating with sig and speed is generally better than mitigating with raw tank. I mean, unless the ecosystem forces something else. Like in wormholes, that's not true, I guess. But in general, a lot of Eve has moved that direction, and to me, that just means we need more tools to counteract that. Since people think brawling is fun.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to have both, right? If
Yeah.
you have like, a good combination, I think is always what people would want to achieve.
Yep.
But yeah, another concern that a good friend of mine, Hai, mentioned, which I'm not like involved in all that often, but since he brought it up, I trust his judgment. The problem is the fact that with the resist change, and then now you only have one capital cap booster on Faxes, you will not be able to tank a Citadel, for example, a Fortizar, with one Fax. So you can't feed a Fax, which smaller groups, and I'm saying smaller, like big low sec groups, but smaller overall, they're not going to be able to put their numbers more towards DPS. Then they would have to bring a Logi Wing, which hurts their DPS, and so yeah.
Yeah, I heard this and Ben actually spent some time last night tinkering to try and figure out how much of this was true and what opinion we had. And I think to start with, whether or not you should be able to solo tank at 0 with a fax it's kind of debatable to me. I don't have like a yes or no, but I don't think it's clear that that's something you should be able to do. But also, I think it is totally possible on one cat booster. It's at least possible to tank through, like you can even under Fort Newts, you can tank for like 8 to 10 minutes with reps just running constantly, and even without heat, just with boosters, you have enough reps to tank Fort DPS until that trio cycle ends, and then you can move after that or slide in another fax or whatever. So I'm pretty sure it's just possible, even though obviously it's harder. You're not going to be able to be totally cap immune if you're under extra cap pressure, not just the fort during that time. It's harder, but it looks to me like it's totally still doable. The numbers you can put up are totally fine. I know a lot of high end like minnows already ran only one cap booster for doing this, so I'm not super worried about it.
Yeah, like I said, it was a friend of mine bringing it up. I didn't check the numbers
Get
actually.
out your clipboard.
And
other.
And I and I never exactly, and I never actually did. I probably fielded effects before on a Fortizar, but I don't remember like how comfortable you were tanking them or all that stuff. So I wouldn't know for sure. But yeah, and then someone brings up, about the Bargon and stuff. But yeah, that's counterplay. That's how the game should work, right? So if only a Fax is there fighting a Fortizar on its own, which is kind of weird, but let's just say, like, I feel like the structure itself shouldn't be killing anything. To be quite honest, the structure itself shouldn't be the killing machine, right? But as soon as support comes in, if it's the right kind of support, I believe that should be the approach that, now the Fortizar is helpful in killing it. Boom. And then you might just kill that Fax. So if that's actually what's happening, I think I'm 100% on board with it, right? And I've always been not a fan of Faxes, especially the way they were. But that was one of those points that was like, maybe they went too far.
Yeah.
I don't know though, right?
I mean, no doubt there'll be adjustment needed.
Yeah, and it's especially, but especially Faxes, super hard to balance, right? Because it affects basically every playstyle, size of group, where you cut, where you draw the line, right?
Yeah, I mean the fax portion of this change and the cap booster change is definitely the hardest, and like, I don't know, it's the hardest part of this whole set of changes to me. It's really tough to figure out where that line should be. I feel like a lot of the other numbers around fax are set up in a way that makes the importance of cap boosters too high and too sensitive. Like the actual cap draw from remote reps and also from local capital reps, it's all like just makes the whole thing very sensitive. Like where it's immune when it has 3 to 4 cap boosters, and it's like definitely very vulnerable cap-wise on just one, and I almost try to squeeze in more changes to some of that peripheral stuff to make the one cap booster thing a little easier to adjust to. But I think it's just so late, we're gonna let it go this way and then take a look at how things adjust and then make another pass soon if it turns out that it's just unworkable.
So, one question that I know a lot of old players would like to hear, like, or want to answer is, what are the chances that we get combat refitting back on Faxes?
I think 0.
Oh shit!
Uh,
Why though?
I think maybe there's like the wanting the things that you got from refitting is a lot more palatable. I think looking at something that's designed more intentionally to support that maybe would be on the table. Things like switching modes so that you get better cap regen in one and better reps in another, or different types of triage, or some other things to resuscitate some of the good things about that gameplay are possible. But I think combat refitting itself is just like, between the pretty nightmarish like usability both for fighting against it and understanding how it works just from like people coming in, to the fact that it just throws the entire fitting game kind of out the window and creates this entire other fitting mini game that isn't really part of any other gameplay. It's just too obscure, too kind of bizarre. And I think if we wanted pieces of that back, we just do it in a way that was not like that. So I don't think combat refitting. I don't know. I mean, who knows? Maybe somewhere down the line someone thinks that's viable, but I don't think so. I think there was good reasons it was changed, and if we need people to have more flexibility and be able to do some of the things that combat refitting offered, we would just go about that differently.
Yeah, well, the argument would obviously be that like combat refitting that requires a little bit more skill, and if you want to make
Yeah,
it work with your body and all that stuff, right? And
yeah, and I mean,
obviously,
I think that's legit. And losing the skill expression and the mastery that was associated with it sucks. Um, would rather have some of that back. I just think if we wanted to get that back, that wouldn't be the way we went about it. But
all right.
certainly none of in the short term, nothing to that scale is going to change with facts. I mean, we're messing with capitals a lot, obviously, and kind of trying to really dig into the entire capital ecosystem pretty deeply. And so I think any of it is on the table in a way. Like a more fundamental rework of facts could be uh, on the table if we just get to, like, if this just keeps being really tough dealing with them the way they're set up now, maybe we look at a bigger rework. But right now, at least, we're gonna just try and find some healthier space under the basic design how they are now.
All right, I'm a little surprised. I would have thought you're gonna say like, we're thinking about it, but I don't know what
No.
exactly at the time. I think when it got removed, I wasn't too invested in faxes or like capital warfare stuff anyway. So I don't remember what the problems with them were. I do not remember. I probably did do it once or twice, but it
I mean, I
wasn't.
think
I
when
wasn't a
like
pro at it.
I can't speak for the guys that did the rework, but my impression is that they just looked at, they're dividing triage away from carriers as a role and kind of redesigning all the ships at once. And they said, if we're designing from scratch how all this works, does combat refitting make sense? And based on how like the rest of Eve works, the idea that you make some decisions about what fit you're going to have in space when you undock, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to just throw that all out the window and have a totally different paradigm for this one situation. And so they said, okay, let's design them without that. And
Yeah, I guess.
I understand that people, there was experts at that and it felt very skill expressive and people hate losing that. Like, that makes sense. But I also think it no one starting from scratch would be like, oh, we have this fitting system that applies to everything in the game, let's just ditch it all for this one ship class that can just change its fit all the time.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I'm sorry for everyone who had hope. It just got crushed.
I mean, keep campaigning if you want. I'm not the only person who's working on this stuff or will be working on this stuff in the future. Who knows? Maybe it ends up being the best option. I don't know.
I mean, maybe that's a future event and you can test it. You know what I mean? But yeah, I don't know.
Do an event where like every ship could change its fit on the fly at any time from
That
cargo or something.
That would be a fun event. A lot of stupid fits will
I
be
think
seen.
people would want it the other way pretty fast. I think it would. Pretty degenerate, but yeah, it'd be fun for a weekend.
If that takes it, if that's what it takes to convince people, right? Give them the event. Like, you asked for it, you know.
I really like the idea of doing nostalgia-based events, like put back old nanofoons for a weekend, or put back like no stacking penalties for a weekend, and you know, let people
No
have the glory
stacking
days for a little while.
Yeah, you know what? I think that would probably also help with, you know, some people, they think back and it's like that crazy ex-girlfriend. They only remember the good times. They do not remember necessarily how broken certain things were, right? So if you would just dial it back in certain areas, people would be surprised, like, how broken was it actually? Yep. Would probably help with
I mean,
that.
it would also be extremely confusing because most people playing now were not around for most of that stuff. And it would just be incredibly bizarre and disorienting suddenly to have, you know, fleets of Vagas and Curses and Typhoons going 16k a second.
Cavalry Ravens, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would see more battleships in space, and I think that's also something you guys were working on.
That'd be a good way to get battleships back in space. Just let them go 6 times as fast. I bet we'd see a lot of them then.
Yeah,
they'd be pretty hard to bomb.
That is 100% true. Yeah, how are you gonna bomb those? I mean, we probably would figure out a way to, you know, kill them anyway, but
coming out of warp or find some way.
I mean, the bombers can burn just as fast, but hey, that's not gonna help. But so you introduced the Frig Bay, which is more, in my eyes, it's more like a fun feature. Like, it's not. Yeah, it's fun, but it's a game, so it's important to have fun. So, like, I definitely support that one. It's not like I'm putting that away as, like, completely useless. I'm saying, yeah, people can stay in the fight and have more fun for longer, even if you're primary. If your name starts with A, and you're fighting an FC who, you know, likes to call by alphabet, god damn it, you're probably not having much fun there. So
I do. I mean, that was just like a fun small step, but I do wonder. I mean, I like the idea of it. It can take so long to find that fight that you really want to be in. The idea of being able to draw that out somehow, that experience, I think is really, like, I don't think we got all the way there with this change, but I like that idea a lot. Like, I don't know, you can, you know, you die, you can buy back your ship at half HP and keep trying or something, so that people can like stay in this situation that's super fun for longer. But also still have kills happening, not people just sitting around nuding each other for 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think it's a fun balance you guys hit there. I think with the Frig Bay, because if you go and say, okay, your ship dies, but it doesn't die really, you come back with half hit or whatever, like, how do you balance that, right? That's harder to balance than combat refitting, really.
Of course, it's a mess.
But that you respawn in a Frig while you were a battleship before, I mean, how much unbalanced, like, how much can that unbalance? So I think it's.
But the problem, I mean, the other side of that is if it doesn't unbalance that much, then it's not actually that much of an incentive to use battleships. You know, it's just sort of a, like you say, a more for fun thing.
Yeah. No, I don't think people.
The more we want people to actually use it, the more we have to make it actually powerful. I think the big step to making it more powerful, so it becomes like a more legit incentive, would be to put it on battle cruisers, because there's much more overlap between stuff you can field that's small and battle cruiser fleets, like, you know, fielding Feroxes with Harpies inside or something is just like matched up well enough that it becomes like a really legit. It's more like you're getting 2 ships for 1 rather than you're just getting a dorky rep ship or something.
What you're saying is battleships get a destroyer bay and battle cruisers get a Frig Bay. I'm just kidding.
Oh man,
Pickies for everyone, guys.
We should give battleships a Saber Bay. That'd be cool.
A Saber
Bay. Yeah.
I mean, that's an incentive right there. If you have battleships and then you can switch to sabers suddenly, that's quite interesting. right?
You
Especially
at least make people do that.
especially if you talk about Black Ops, right? Because that's another thing people keep bringing up. What about the T2 battleships? The resist nerve, the hit points. I forgot actually. The hit points did apply to Black Ops.
The hit points were only
No.
the hit points didn't apply to Tech 2. We are going to put the scan res on the Tech 2 classes.
Yeah, so at least people spoke up, and you're like, yeah, okay, you're right. The scan res, you can have it,
Yeah.
but why not the hit points, right?
I mean, I don't know. I have, I guess, the feeling that both those classes, Marauders and Black Ops, need like a more serious rework. Like they need just a deeper kind of freshening. And so I'm just not wanting to tinker as much with them. I feel like they're farther from where they need to be, so they just need a more full. I know that almost sounds like, like totally backwards. But yeah, basically, I don't know. I just think they need a more full look, and I'm just saving more work for when that happens, rather than trying to do it piece by piece alongside normal battleship stuff.
So one of the things that I always thought about battleships, like they're battleships, right? So they should have like a ton of tools to do a ton of stuff and be like an all-round kind of the tool you would choose for like a big battle, right? So an all-round tool. So I always thought like, why don't they have like more things going on? Like why not put like bomb launchers or defenders on them, or why not give them more range in general? Because that's probably in the meta versus hacks. That's one of those factors that I always wondered about. Like, why do hacks have so much range, especially when you compare them to battleships? Shouldn't battleships just outrange them, right? So like an all-round kind of boost.
Yeah, I think that's legit. I mean, yeah, we haven't talked a ton lately about range. It's definitely, I think, reasonable. I mean, battleship range can get real crazy with long range guns, but then you're not hitting anything. So pushing short range guns out further could totally be a good approach. As far as the utility stuff, we talked a lot about putting bomb launchers on them, like one CSM ago. I think it sounds sort of fun. I mean, one big problem is if you get to a point where you could have battleship versus battleship fights, then they just bomb each other off the field, and there's like,
Unless they're on zero. If you want to brawl, you're on zero.
yeah.
Like, who are you gonna bomb? Right?
But the bigger reason not to, I mean, as much as battleships are very flexible and can do a lot relative to other ships because of how many slots they have, at least at smaller scales, that's true. But I think something we're always trying to promote is more class diversity, like more dependence, and like these utility classes, like bombers. I mean, bombers are a weird case, but dictors, logi, command bursts, all this stuff is like kind of the best tool we have for getting more than just one blob of the same ship all doing the same thing. And so whenever we take like a utility role and put it onto the mainline ship, we just lose that class diversity. And I think that is something we're trying to go the other direction, usually trying to put utility roles onto some other class so that you have a more diverse fleet, because then you have more then the other guys have more reason to bring anti-support or to bring whatever answer, and getting away from like just there's only one ship you need and you have 300 of them, I think,
like Horde Titans. Yeah. I'm just kidding. That actually makes a lot of sense. I have to say.
Yeah, but I mean, it's tough because when you have, I think we struggle a lot with this with battleships, where that is the most obvious way to get them viability, because they're never going to be the fastest, and speed is so important, is to give them utility options that push them ahead. I do like the idea of better damage at range, better damage in general. I feel like the gap between cruiser and battlecruiser and then battleship damage is too close, and if they had, in a way, if they did 50% more damage and had 50% more HP, I think that would be pretty cool. The problem with that is then we break like all PvE, and probably break a lot of ecosystems that are more focused on battleships already. I mean, one funny thing about battleships, everybody's wishing always that they were more popular, but as of now, battleships as a class do more PvP damage in the game than any other class. They're they're already and extremely powerful, and especially when you look at anything but null, where bombs are present. You know, you look at wormholes or low sec or high sec, and you see a lot more battleship usage, and you see plenty in null. You see plenty in null as well, and so it's also scary to push. You know, if we gave them a huge buff like that that made them more preferred than hacks or other smaller comps in null, you'd probably just see them be the kind of end all in every ecosystem in the game, which maybe that'd be fun. I don't know, but it's at least makes it a little sketchy to think about pushing them that far ahead.
Yeah, interesting. Actually, I didn't know. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I talked about it before, and I know a certain wormholer made fun of me saying bombers are oppressive. I'm using bombers all the time. They are oppressive to a degree. Are they too oppressive, or like that's up to for discussion, obviously. But battleships, you think twice about fielding battleships if you know bombers are around. That is a factor, so it is oppressing, right? Every time any FC takes a battleship fleet out, he's like, "All right, what do we do about the bomb fleet that's in system?" So yeah, so low sec does see more battleship action. Yeah, obviously.
I mean, looking at how it's all distributed is more complicated, but like yesterday, for instance, 22 million damage on kill mails by battleships, 19 million by cruisers, 16 million by hacks, 15 million by dreads, 12 million by battle cruisers, and then it kind of continues. But battleships are at the top pretty much always, and that's great. They should be up there. They should be like the go-to, like you say, for a lot of different PvP kind of situations, but also that makes it hard to like, okay, if we continue to try and make them the go-to in every meta across the game, we might hurt diversity really bad.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see more battleships in nullsec fights, and I would like to be able to field them in more fights. But I also believe the main factor is that obviously I have to move them places, right? So if the game itself would be a different one, right? Let's say we had 10 times the number of players. I would only have to do like maybe one Titan bridge, 2 jumps, and I'm in someone else's staging. It would be a different story. I could bring battleships then, because then I don't have to travel to the other side of Eve. So
yeah, and I mean, you know, we did the warp speed change to begin alleviating some of that. We don't want to completely lose the difference in mobility, but yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think how much time and work it should take to move ships of a different size is like definitely something that seems up for debate. People are asking how much is less shacks from that battleship damage. A lot is less shacks.
Oh yeah, that's true. Actually, a lot of the damage is probably Leshak's like on structures then.
Like this is not structures. It's actually on ships.
It's only ships. All right.
Not including structures at all. But
it's wormholes with Leshak's.
Leshak spending half an hour shooting a wormhole fax definitely counts on this and adds up. So
those wormhole faxes, guys. I've shot some of those. They're nasty. But yeah, wormholers had some concerns there, obviously too, right? It's the same thing we talked about earlier. Yeah. And I'm pretty sure they'll do all right with the faxes how they are, and I think they will come around to this. I honestly think so.
I mean, I'm real curious. There's no doubt it'll change a lot. I think it seems very likely that their fights are bloodier, which may mean they don't bling stuff as much. I don't know, but I wonder, you know, like you say, you think they'll come around. I hope it's more fun to have more stuff dying and not need like 10 Balgorns and whatever to break every small fleet with a fax. But I know they also like that gameplay a lot, so I'm not going to say that I know it'll be more fun for them. And I'm just super curious to see.
But that's the thing. If people like that, the wormholes or like mid-sized alliances that have that exact playstyle, if they approach the fax in the same way, it's going to be less fun. I'm pretty sure. They have to approach the fax in a different way. they have to approach it as, okay, if we lose the fax, is that going to be the end of it? If you're in your own wormhole, lose your 1 fax, yeah, so what? Bring 2 fax, bring 3 fax. It's 3 planets. It's not the end of the world in most cases. If you want to support your fleet with like an unbreakable logi, you have to just buy enough time to kill the enemy, right? So, and it goes both ways, obviously, right? But
yeah. I mean, I've had, there's people trying to figure this out. I don't think anybody knows exactly yet. Laura Secco told me a couple days ago, or right after the patch dropped, he's like, he felt like he was on an acid trip, trying to, like, in a sort of state of delirium, figure out what to do with all their fits, and that makes sense.
And you know what? There's also a chance they're right. There's a chance
I
that
mean, there's
we'll
no
see,
there's no arguing they're right that it changes things. I mean, the question is just, is it more fun or is it less fun? And there's varying opinions, but I think that's what we'll have to wait and see about, because it's hard. Now we can't know because we don't know exactly how things will pan out and then how that'll feel. But there's no doubt that all his fits will have to change. That the way they fight will have to change.
And I think one point that I didn't did we talk about it? I'm not sure. In a different context, I think the problem with fax is that I always saw was definitely the fights that do not happen, right? So those don't show up on any kill board. Nobody notices, right? A lot of times you go out, let's say we film it out with 25 people when these things come out. We would technically be able to break the new faxes, maybe, right? If you bring this right setup, I could make a setup and then say, okay, now it's maybe possible. Maybe you bring 2 Bargons. Before that, I wouldn't even bring any Bargons. There's no chance I kept them out anyway.
Yeah.
So what happens usually is, like, I see a fax undock with a fleet. Like, I'm not even taking the fight in the first place. So all these fights are gone. But now there might be an opening that we would see. So
and the other side of the argument, which I think we can acknowledge, is that maybe when those guys can't undock that fax to keep themselves alive because they think there's a chance they'll lose it, they don't undock at all, and so then the fight doesn't happen for that reason.
And someone,
I don't want to ignore that possibility. It's just really tough to guess about both the fights that aren't happening now and the fights that won't happen afterwards. We just, we're making the leap that there will be more, that the side you're saying is more common, that the extreme obstacle that a single fax can be stops a lot of fights happening, or stops a lot of people from enjoying fights that do happen, and it'll be better if they are a little bit more vulnerable. But we just have to find out by putting it there on Tranquility and seeing what people do.
All right, so we have faxes with battleships. I think the Munin and Eagle nerf, I don't think there's too much to say about it. I think everyone agrees. I've not seen anyone saying like, oh no, you touched my Munin or my Eagle. Some people wondered, why did you nerf the Eagle in the same? But I totally agree. If you would have just nerfed the Munin and then leave the Eagle, I think that wouldn't...
just slide in super obviously. And it might even still, I'm a little worried, it's still not enough to keep that from happening. But
you might be right, yeah.
I think this is it's funny having this conversation about resists and facts, because I think usually my tendency is to under nerf. Like, I think I've nerfed the Munin twice since the buff it got 2 years ago, whenever that was, and neither time was enough to really shake it out of the meta. It made it a little worse, which is fine for the dominant thing to not be quite as powerful, but trying this time to actually do enough to force some change in the fleet meta. So hopefully that's true for the Eagle as well, but we'll see. I mean, it's fine if obviously it still gets used some, but if it just slides in as like a replacement and is equally powerful, that's probably a little boring.
Yeah, but I really believe 99% of people agree to that, and it was a long time coming anyway. Everyone knew. But are there other ships that you guys are looking at right after, where you like, all right, there's stuff that needs to happen?
I mean, there's some Zappy boys that we're talking about.
I don't know what Zappy boys are. Then please don't tell me.
I won't. Don't worry. I won't tell you. But yeah, we're talking about, I mean, a lot of different stuff. We're
Nerf
talking
poets. Sorry.
about some. I think like Talos has been talking about a Dictor update for quite like since we started. We've had that as like a kind of a gimme because there's just obviously no real diversity among Dictors. So trying to make some of the others get used a little more often, and then maybe some new bubble types. Maybe make some NPCs that can drop bubbles. It's a few interesting things we can do there. And yeah, I mean, there's lots of other stuff. I'm trying to think. There's the heavy bomber conversation, which I brought up in Vegas. That's still ongoing. Although I do feel like now with such a brutal change to supers and titans over the last couple months, we need to make sure that we have them established in like a functional role before we add even more things to shit on them. So maybe some further updates for supers, maybe some, yeah, I don't know, some things to just make sure that they're in an okay place before we
Yeah.
pile on more tools for screwing with them. Navy ships have been something that's like needed a big revisit for a long time. I'm hoping before the end of this year we get a chance to do that. We have a bunch of wacky ideas for moving Navy ships a lot kind of more into their own space uh, than the rest of the battleship, or for all of them. It's really hard right now to find good niches for them at like a slightly higher price point, but generally similar power level. And so we're going to try and slide them into something completely different, hopefully. Don't know when exactly that will be, but it's near-ish future for sure.
So the heavy bomber thing, it's an interesting to me, right? When you guys, I'm not sure, like you announced it in Vegas, right? That you guys are looking into this or you're working on it. Like it was a little vague. And then everyone convoked me because I like to bomb shit, and it's kind of, be great for kind of a Stuka approach and stuff. But I instantly felt like this is gonna be a nightmare to balance right. Like, how do you get that right? I could instantly tell this is not gonna be something coming in like easily. And then how is it, like, how fast are these bombs, and like how much do they tank, and how much can you bomb at the same time, and
Yeah, and actually
how much
now
damage?
we're not really talking about it as bombers necessarily. The hope, the big hope long term is that we have an escalation chain for capitals where there's a good reason to bring the first layer of capitals, carriers, dreads, facts to the field. Supers and titans, it's a good, you want to bring them to kill normal caps, and then to complete that escalation loop, there's a subcap way to answer if someone is over indexed on supers and titans. And uh, I think for that to make sense, the subcap class needs to be expensive and represent some real commitment. Like it can't be bombers that come out of a wormhole, and instantly zap stuff. Like that doesn't make any sense. I think they need to be just a justified amount of, or a reasonable amount of commitment as an answer to someone who's over indexing on big capitals that are not going to be able to on their own do well against the sub cap capital counter. And because right now there's you never want to go down the escalation chain with the exception of dread bombs. Basically you never want to like, oh, there's an umbrella dropped here, there's this good sub cap thing we can do other than boosh around in circles and kill fighters or something like that. And we would like to have an actual answer there where like they've stupidly brought 4 supers to this belt to fight off our small gang. We have some tool we can use at a subcap scale against them. But as you say, designing that is pretty tough. And I think trying to design that before we've accomplished a successful like rest of that escalation chain doesn't make a lot of sense. Like we need to see that the rest of it is actually working sort of all right, which right now it's not still. So
Yeah, so it's still on the list. It's just fairly far down, right?
I mean, it's not that far down. We've been trying to work through this, like the basics, the broad strokes of this set of capital changes over the last 3 to 6 months or whatever, like since the new year basically. And I feel like we have one more big step with capital stuff, which is probably about kind of reestablishing a good role for supers, making sure that there's a reason to undock supers and titans, maybe making some specific capital oriented content to just get them into space.
Yes, please.
And and hopefully trying to find a reason that in a big fight you'd want a super more than a titan, like for some particular, whether it's because of a ranged advantage or some utility role or something like that. Like I think they need something to stand out. So I feel like we have one more step that's got a lot of those pieces in it, and then after that would be or as part of that potentially would be the heavy bomber step. But it's not so far away. It's something that we're actively working on.
Yeah, you know what? The heavy bomber thing, when you guys released the trailer, there was that one ship in there with the kind of keeps the doomsday chain gun kind of thing.
Did you notice that?
I did notice that. Yeah, I'm kind of curious about that one. Like I'm not gonna lie, that might be just fun. And I thought like this could be the heavy bomber approach, or not the approach, but the replacement for it. Because I already felt like heavy bomber thing. It's gonna take a long time probably, but I thought that approach is a little bit more interesting because now you don't have that factor of like, let's say 50 bombers wiping out entire fleets, but no, you can limit how much they hit, but they hit several targets, right? So I thought that's a very interesting approach. I did not think about that. I do hate the Keepstar Doomsday. I really do. I think that should not hit any subcaps, but the idea itself, it's quite nice, I think.
Well, I encourage you to keep speculating.
Well, so if we have to speculate, I mean, it's a new ship, you could tell, right? I think that's pretty obvious. It's a new ship from Upwell, right? So we already had this one stream. For those who were watching, there was actually a stream going on where like, especially the lore guys had a lot of stuff to dissect and so on.
Yeah.
So there was a stream from Talking in Stations.
Yeah, right after the trailer reveal.
Yeah, where we just talked about all kinds of stuff. And yeah, for like players like me, there was only that ship to focus on really, and then maybe that the Triglavians they're taking space, but I'm not sure if that's going to impact my gameplay. So I don't know. So yeah, but the ship, interesting.
I mean, EVE is a spaceship game. It needs more spaceships. So that's something that's always happening. And we've made quite a few trig ships. I think the trig stuff's gone really well, and maybe we should make more at some point. But I think we've had, it's been like 2 years now or something like that of making mostly trig ships for new stuff. I think the last thing before trig stuff that was new was the Bouchers, actually, which has been quite a while. So yeah, need to keep doing new things and not always do trig things. So maybe we'll do something different.
And so you mentioned like having more reason for supers and titans to be in space. Like let's say an NPC anomaly that is worth undocking for in a super or titan. That might just strike the balance like with risk reward for them. I would appreciate that for sure, because I think that's my biggest critique on Blackout. It's like nobody in space to hunt, right? Like I don't, and it's the same for the mineral changes. And I do understand. I mean, I don't quite understand, but I get the point of too much minerals, and we need to tone it down and give it some time and so on. But there's less rockets in space. There's less targets for like bigger groups to hunt. So
yeah, we need things in space for sure. I think that's been an unfortunate, or like specifically because I've been working more on it. The capital application stuff, taking application away from supers and titans means ratting is either impossible or inefficient, which means less things in space, which is just bad. Like I would definitely rather have those ships in space. So we talked about some pretty I would almost say desperate. I don't know, but we talked about trying to solve this right away as like an interim solution, doing things like having uh, a super NSA that gives back a bunch of fighter application but hamstrings them in PvP, like takes away max HP or resists or lock range or something, so that they keep application versus NPCs, but lose it in any like you lose total viability in any actual fight, so that we don't disrupt super ratting just because having the ships in space is so valuable to the game. We obviously decided not to do that for this pass, but it's something we need to address soon. Like we can't. I don't think we can afford to say the only reason to put really big ships in space is for umbrella response or for some big set fight. Like having the traffic there for people to use as objectives is really important, especially when we're kind of low on smaller scale objectives. Like that's the other piece, I guess, is along with having big ships in space to act as objectives, we need to work on adding objectives that are worthwhile and fun for smaller groups or for roaming groups or whatever. And that's another piece that we're going to be focusing on. I hope we can really put a lot more time into in the next like 2 quadrants, because we've been discussing it a lot but haven't made big steps on that in a while. So we have some structure changes lined up real soon, which will help a bit. And then I hope we can continue to like look at new things we can put in space for people to fight over shortly after that.
So when you say structure changes and like conflict drivers or fight generators for smaller groups, I instantly have to think about something I've been talking about on here, I don't know, countless times. I probably talked about that to you before. I'm not entirely sure. But I do believe that like if you turn off all Citadel defenses unless they're getting attacked, then you have a real incentive for smaller groups to just wing it, just warp to that keepstar, poke around on that unlock, play those station games. And you remember those station games. I mean, how much content did that generate?
I actually benefited from them as well, but I don't think that's going to be one of the short-term steps. That would be incredibly disruptive, and we'd have to like disable tether and do all kinds of things that are...
No, why? Why would you need to disable tether?
Because how do station games make any sense if you just undock tethered? It doesn't do anything.
So what? But that's fine. You know, they used to undock and be in dock range.
Yeah,
and
most
then,
of the time. Except you could bump them out, or they would.
You could,
spit
but a lot of times, I think I would argue the most kills that resulted from station games were not because the guy got caught and like, you know, trying to dock or stay 100% safe.
We should say 5% of the time you undock tether doesn't work.
No, but my argument is usually what would happen is they undock, you know, with a certain ego. They want to see what's outside. They make a mistake.
I know,
right? So there is at least a chance.
I see, you know, I think there could be some upside to that. I don't think we're going to do that in the short term. I think that would be a pretty crazy disruption. It leads to a bunch of weird stuff. You shoot your own structure to turn on the defenses, which doesn't make any sense to anyone.
I mean, in this case, I mean, obviously you would implement...
You're probably happy with, because then you have to put a ship on the grid and shoot it, which you then get...
No. Like, I'd see the problem there, obviously. So you would obviously implement something like, let's say, you need to have, like, 10% of your shield must be missing for that to actually happen, right? Yeah. So who is shooting his structure for, like, and then remove 10% of the shields, and then it has to be in repair mode on top of it, right? So that combination needs to be there. So otherwise, like, so obviously you would put some rules in place.
Maybe,
like,
I don't know. I think there's other roads here, hopefully, to giving things in space for you to fight over without having to do this specifically. But I hear you. I don't think you have actually come after me about this before,
dude.
I can take it back.
I don't want to bring it up, but I had Brisk bring it up at the CSM, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and it was, and that's the thing. It was a mistake. It's not the environment for that. You know, it's not the right environment in a CSM meeting because, no, the problem is, I've been thinking about this particular thing like countless times. I like came up for solutions like you just said, like what if someone undocks and shoots it? Like I do have an idea about like what people would do, but so I had Brisk bring it up, and people dismiss it instantly with like, they don't have it's not fair to them. They don't have the time to think about it for a long time like I had coming up with it. So on the spot, you have to make that decision. It's probably easier to say like, oh no, it's not going to work because, and then just dismiss it and move on, right? I don't want to say similar as you just did, but it is similar. You know what I mean? So it's also not fair to you. I put you on the spot and say, okay, and then you can't just say like, that sounds great, and you didn't have the time to think about it.
Send me
Yeah. All right.
We can continue talking about it, or you can send me a thing, or I don't know. We can. It's interesting, but yeah, I mean, at least right now, I'm not saying.
Hey.
I'm not saying yes to anything.
But hey, anyone who is listening to this who sees a massive problem with it, just send it to me. I'll filter it out and then see like if there's holes in this. I'm more than willing to admit that I was wrong, and
I still though do think that like the thing you want, which is a way to get people to engage or a way to get action when you're roaming in hostile space, is like obviously something we both want, and we're looking at a lot of different stuff. We're looking at ESSs and a potential ESS rework. We're looking at completely new types of objectives, maybe that have different different restrictions and benefits to taking them. I can't really say anything very specific about that, but basically we're talking about this a ton. I think there'll be stuff coming soon, and the structure stuff coming up super soon, even though it's not completely dedicated to this, should also be a big step. It's like another set of adjustments to low power, so hopefully there's more opportunity for people to take advantage of structures that aren't getting used.
All right. I mean, I'm glad to hear, even if it's not the exact change I want, I'm glad to hear you guys are looking at Citadels, because I do believe it's probably number one issue, right? Conflict driving wise and stuff. It's tough, but I'm glad you guys are looking into this.
Yeah,
I think everyone is.
Yeah, we're trying. It's tough. I think we've gotten ourselves in a really tough spot with Citadels because we've tried to have them be so many things at the same time. Like Citadels are trying to carry so many different goals as a feature. They're trying to be housing, they're trying to be accessible to small people, but also be important strategic structures for big people. Their weapons, their storage things. They're doing so much stuff at once that they end up having a lot of really big challenges in trying to make them feel healthy for any particular thing. Like they end up kind of halfway doing the job, and I think it's actually amazing that 5.0 is able to get them to do all this stuff at all. But I think it's inevitable that with so many goals for them, they are not able to do any one of those jobs perfectly. And I think something else that we can hopefully do, something that seems really obvious to me, is take this single goal of having like exposing income to be harassed, or creating objectives for people to fight over, or create conflict drivers. Just separate that from Citadels. Do it with something else that doesn't have to be burdened with like issues with asset safety or timers or whatever. We can design specifically around wanting people to fight. I think that will just like unlock a lot for us. And so at least in part, along with looking at Citadels and trying to make improvements there, we're also looking at how can we make more conflict stuff that isn't tied up in all the complexity of Citadels.
Yeah. And so you mentioned asset safety. Like obviously there's probably not going to be anything you can say, but that's one of the big issues people have been talking about, obviously. I'm super happy that you are approaching that one. I'm not sure how you're going to do it, and you probably can't announce it anyway. But yeah.
I mean, we don't have a change. Like I couldn't announce it if we had one, but I can say we haven't settled on like some change. But for me at least, I feel like it's kind of similar to talking about Citadels in general, where I feel like people talk about asset safety because they want to use it as a way to incentivize structure killing. They want, like, basically they want to be rewarded for killing things. I think some people probably want to just harshly punish people who have their assets in space and feel like that in null that shouldn't be. You just shouldn't, out of principle, have safety there. I'm less persuaded by that argument. I think that's less likely to be the focus of any changes we make, is to say that, like, there just shouldn't be asset safety in null. I don't think that's realistic, and I think if we enforce that, people just won't put things in citadels, they'll put them other places. So to me, it's more about unlocking rewards somehow for people through maybe partly through asset safety things. Like, to me, we could just hand the asset safety tax to structure killers instead of flushing it down the drain, and that would be fine. um, and I think there's other stuff like that, that we can do that maybe incorporate asset safety to some extent, but don't say, hey, if you're missing for a while, your stuff's just all going to be gone when you get back. Or if you made the
But
dumb decision to live in a system without NPC stations, you're just screwed.
so that, I mean, there's several approaches to this, obviously, right? So you can approach it as like, does everything drop? And I think you're right. That's ridiculous in nullsec, especially. I mean, you can't just do that. But what are the chances that we get like 50% drop rate, right? If you lose half your shit.
But why would you drop, like, who? Like, then you take half the people who live there and they feel terrible, and the other half feel fine. I mean, I don't know. Like taking a punishment that seems incredibly harsh and then attaching some RNG to it. Uh, I don't know if that relieves it. I think then you just, like, it lessens it. Like, some people feel okay, but
Well, so I mean, you could, like, the approach. I think I wrote it down even on one of those docs where, like, I wrote a ton of shit about citadels. You could go and say it drops 50%, but then make an exception for like Alliance headquarters or Corp headquarters or whatever, right?
Mhm.
So people can
Yeah.
save their assets, but then most citadels where stuff is like, in, like, let's say in Sotios where
Yeah.
people build a lot of shit, so at least
Sure.
there half the stuff drops. And then also,
Yeah.
I mean, it's important for people, like you said. Someone is not around for like 2 months or so, right? If he comes back, you don't want him necessarily to lose everything or even half his stuff. And I think there is a middle ground. I think the important
Yeah,
part.
you're right. I think there could be middle grounds. I think low power actually is a middle ground in a way. Like, if you uh yeah, have some stations you're just not using, you don't care about, they're just sitting there. Like, I don't think it's crucial that we protect the stuff that's inside those. um and yeah, maybe yeah, you can call out certain stations where it's important that stuff is safe, but in others, uh certain structures, and in others it's not such a big deal. I think that's so legit. Yeah, there probably is middle ground. When you said it first, I was like, just imagining, like, yeah, just splitting in half the main storage for everybody's shit. Like, I think probably that feels pretty much just as bad. But if you split hairs a bit more and figure out some cases where it seems fine, that could be totally cool.
Yeah, and I think the big difference on, like, you have a drop rate on citadels is gonna be the attackers do have a chance to, right? So they have a chance of something dropping. They might
Yeah.
nothing might be
I mean,
dropping, but
the other thing about this to me, though, is we could, again, I think you could have something drop. You could have it be valuable to kill the structure without having to drop things people own in there. There's a really simple idea that I like quite a bit that we've been kicking around, to just say, when you put up a structure, you have to invest some upfront cost in it that always drops when you kill it. So you got to put a chip in the structure that costs 5 billion ISK to turn it on. And then when the thing's killed, that thing just drops and can be sold back to NPCs for 5 billion ISK. And that way the killer is getting something without it having to be attached to random assets for people who live there, but instead is attached to the investment in the structure itself. And I think there's plenty of that kind of design that could do the job of making it worthwhile to go and kill stuff. Another one, a guy brought up at Vegas, which is kind of funny and would only matter for certain structures, but would be to hold a portion of taxes taken off services in the structure as a pot. So, like, every manufacturing or market tax that gets scraped out of the structure, like some portion of that just gets held as like a bounty on the structure, basically, in like a safe, for if you kill it. And of course, in busy areas, that would stack up and become like this
Yeah, I
really
like that
big
one.
target on your head. And I think there's all kinds of stuff like this we could do that isn't about just dropping the things in the hangars, but finding other ways.
The only problem I see with that one is suddenly people start killing their own structures, right? It's like,
Yeah, but like, yeah, I mean, yeah, you'd have to deal with some some edge cases. Although it sounds really funny to me that there's like basically a timer on how much you can collect, and then you just have to kill your own. You have to get everyone to move everything out and kill it.
That's what happens in Walmart space, right? I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
So for those who are not aware, like in Walmart space, it's very common that people would unanchor their staging Fortizar. So everyone who is not active at this moment, that stuff drops. And then they collect it, put it in a corp hanger, put their Fortizar back up, and then they basically clean up their comments. So it's less of a target. People know you do this. So, if you're lazy, you're a big target.
Mm-hmm.
There have been cops in the past that didn't do that.
Yeah, and again, none of this stuff is like fully fleshed out or perfect, but I think there's lots of options that we have. I mean, the main point is right now there's not enough disincentive. Like, it's crazy to be killing something this big and not getting anything for it, and we need to do something about that.
So another thing structure related would be like antiplexes, which actually got a nerf just distance wise. Like, first of all, why did you decide not to put? It's probably a different team, right? It's probably 5-0, but
5-0, like, I mean, antiplexes are kind of old. They're built by 5-0 a while ago, and then we just did the range change recently on Talos.
Yeah, but why are cyanogens still in Keepstar range, for example?
Yeah, we could move them out. I don't know. Antiplex was just the focus of that change. Just cared more about that, and so just did Antiplex. Decided not to. It could move. I don't know. It was just the Antiplex seemed like the. I don't know.
The better fight generator,
I guess. And that's just so we just decided not to expand to the cyanogens for that pass.
Yeah, and I think we have seen way more fights kick off on antiplexes since then. I'm not sure if you tracked it.
Yeah, we've been hearing. I mean, hearing a lot about them from both sides. They're driving some content, which is really cool. They're also making logistics people extremely miserable, and so we're hearing from both ends.
Well, that might just happen, It's like you got to work for it if you want the perks. I mean, another thing about antiplexes is what I always wondered. So the idea was player built Stargates, right? That was what first was announced like years back, and then for like a long time nobody talked about it because it's like how Stargates work. If you implement that as player built, that probably would cause a lot of issues. So you guys took the jump bridges off pauses and then put them like where they are today, right? But if they were the player owned Stargate approach, like why can't hostiles take them? Like wouldn't it be cool if you have enough liquid ozone in your cargo, you can just take it anyway?
I mean, it'd be cool for you.
It would be cool for everyone. I mean,
not for the people owning the Antiplex. I think they would probably not want to use them if they became a way for people to move around their own space and like.
Gotta be more careful, Or you hack a bridge. Exactly. That's another thing.
I think, I wasn't part of making them originally, but it's easy for me to kind of imagine that if they could be taken both directions by hostiles, they would basically not be worth it. They probably wouldn't get used, or at least it'd be really difficult. I'm guessing that's the main reason. I don't know. I mean, obviously, I can't say exactly how it would work out if you could take them, but I'm assuming it would be completely unworkable for the people running the networks.
But just like Hildulf said, like I probably agree with what you just said, right? It probably would be a little bit too strong. But then again, you would have to think, where do you put jump bridges then? I would still think people would use jump bridges, just not as many. I mean, look at the map. There's like tons of jump bridges everywhere. But then Hildo says like hacking, right?
Yeah.
That would be a cool way to introduce hacking to like a PvP scenario, right?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, having like a way to like open them up both ways for a limited time if you can keep people on grid for some duration, blah blah blah. I think that sounds more like reasonable at least. Especially if there's some stake in doing that. You know, you have to bring along some deployable that costs some money to get that done, and so the defenders can feel good if they can keep you from doing it. This is something we're
Or it
talking
simply
about so
takes
much is
time,
with
right?
yeah, and it would take time. Yeah, I mean, I think that at least sounds like an interesting discussion. It'd be cool if there was a way to get that into a balanced place so that it could be kind of stolen and used both directions. That sounds healthier at least than than just getting to freely use their network.
And then there's another obvious thing, in my eyes at least obvious. I'm not sure. There was with Ansiplex's. When you approach it as player-owned Stargates, also, if you're hit pointed, you can still jump. If you're bubbled, you can still jump, even though jump bridges, that wasn't the case. So it's a mix, but then for content generation, it's the worst mix of both worlds, really. Right? So that's another thing that, you probably keep hearing also from.
Yeah,
Like,
I actually remember going through like a pretty big discussion about tackling people to keep them from going back through, and then we ended up deciding not to do that. But I can't remember can't remember how that whole discussion went. But um, yeah, I mean, I also thought you like changing the dynamic, like making it so you can't scram to go back through. I don't know if that's necessary, but maybe making it so that you come out a little further from the gate, so it's a little easier to catch people. Something like that could be fine. So the reapproaching is a little more difficult.
well,
Um,
Sajin is just noticing or saying that the exact opposite, right? Because they spawn so far from it, you can't even bubble it and cover the entire gate because it's so far, right? That's another thing.
yeah.
So it goes
Eh,
both ways. Like, they're further
yeah.
away, but the structure might just be too big, right? If the structure was smaller in scale, so you could have them spawn far enough so they can't jump back right away, but then they are in bubble range.
Yeah.
It's that balance that that's
Yeah.
tricky, I guess.
It's tough to say like how disruptive you should be able to be, and like how much you should be able to punish someone for using. I don't know. I don't have like a clean answer. I think it's cool that since the change to push them off the keep stars, or out of structure range, there's more stuff happening around them. I don't know if we need to go further or not. Like if this is a good amount or more. I think at least right now we're more focused on having other things, other points of conflict, rather than focusing more um, on the gate infrastructure. But yeah, maybe it needs more changes.
And yeah, I mean, we talked about that like how many times now? Like 4 times. Like how hard it is to strike the balance, and I mean, it's just, I guess that's to be expected. I mean, Eve is the most complex game out there, probably, right? And you and Fozzy or other devs, you only have so much time in a day. So there's a long list of things you probably want to touch on, but you can't just like do it all at once, right?
Yeah, it's a huge game. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm really glad we've gotten to hit a lot of different parts of the game lately and like be a little bit more nimble. It feels really good. Um, but yeah, it's tough. I always feel like one thing that I wish rather than infinite power for me to change things, I wish we had infinite power to analyze, like infinite analytics resources and metrics resources are we have so much data, like we have so much information, but our bandwidth for processing it is always strained. We're always talking about um, how much more we could do if we could uh, kind of more automatically monitor and measure. You saw in the ecosystem blog recently, there was a lot of talk about like having indices for health for different parts of the ecosystem. And a lot of what that's kind of talking about is trying to establish a more kind of automatic analytics that can let us know when things have moved a certain direction or when they're moving in a bad direction. Right now, a lot of that work is super manual and it's tough. It's like, a lot of the changes that Talos has been able to make over the last 3 to 6 months, especially, um, it's to be this fast. We don't have much time for a lot of stopping to pick through tons of data and figure out exactly whether, like with jump gates, for instance, like it would be worth going and spending a whole week trying to figure out what exactly changed from that. How many fights happen around gates? How many people come through and then escape when there's hostiles there? But like, there's no way that we could keep any kind of pace if we're doing that level of manual analytics. And so that's always what I wish if I had as much as possible. It'd be just smart data people to let us know what was happening as a result of changes.
And a lot of, or a big chunk of the problem, obviously, you can have all the data in the world, but if you interpret it the wrong way, then what's the use anyway, right? So,
but there are so many like that's definitely true, and it's something that we run into a lot. But there are so many areas where our kind of resolution, our just the information we have is not. We just could do with more. Like even if sometimes we made wrong interpretations, it would go a long way. We have a lot. I mean, we've come a long way too in the last couple of years. Our data gathering and a lot of our analytics has gotten a lot more sophisticated, but every little extra piece we get feels like it unlocks a lot for us.
Yeah, and then also like who would interpret it, right? So you need experienced devs for the most complex game in the world, really. And then like it must be hard to find the right guys for the job. You know what I mean? Like where do you find devs that want to dive into the most complex game in the world, like, and then interpret data? Like they don't even to bring a new dev up to speed that has never played Eve, for example. That's probably impossible, right? That probably takes so long. Like, might as well do something else with the money instead of employing another dev. Yeah, right.
It's tough. I mean, I'm not in HR or anything, but it's definitely hard. I think we try to rely on being a team with like a diverse skill set because getting everything in one person, getting like Eve, even if you find someone who's Eve knowledgeable, they're only going to be Eve knowledgeable for part of Eve. There's like I have a lot of Eve knowledge, but like I don't know shit about wormholes to begin with. So I have to do the same work that not the same, because if you're actually a non-player, of course you have more ground to make up, but there's no way to have someone who knows everything about Eve. And then on top of that, you need, all kinds of other design expertise and technical expertise. And I think we've done a lot over the years of kind of, for a period, like when the department gets kind of low on industry background and, things more like just design methodology or process or even just perspective outside of like Eve, which is bizarre. We look away from Eve expertise and more towards people with that industry background. And then if we wind up low on Eve knowledge and looking, to where we need more Eve experts, then we swing back that way a bit. I think that's just kind of always been a natural state for Eve dev, is trying to pick from many worlds and then hoping that the intersection of all of them leads us to smart stuff. But it's not simple.
Yeah, I can only imagine, right? All right, guys. Usually we aim for 2 hours. We had 1 hour 50. So, and I know Rise is waiting for the wife to come home, and he would have to bail then anyway. So, guys, if you have
my window crying because I'm not spending time with her.
All right, so guys,
go out and tell her Panda's more important. Sorry.
Well, then let's cut it out here.
Cool. Great to chat. Nice to finally make it. Sorry, it's such a long time coming. I've been meaning to come over here and hang out for probably
I think timing was perfect.
5 months now, but yeah, this was a
was a good opportunity to chat, and much appreciated. And I also extend that to the rest of the team, right? I see like a lot of people see like the effort like they put in talking to the community, doing like Twitch streams and stuff like this, and much appreciated. And
I'll
I'm glad.
definitely pass it along. There's a lot of smart dudes that don't come out here on the TV all that much.
So say thanks to them, and thanks again, and
take care. Let me know if you kill some facts.
and see you guys on the next one.